Hello, and welcome to myfinanceteacher.org. Let's have a quick update on precious metals again, which do look nice, with gold finally giving us a higher high as opposed to the recent high in the middle of March. So what do I think is going to happen over the next, say, a few days and several weeks? Let's have a look at that, and we're going to start with the US dollar. We see that the US dollar daily cycle is now 53 days long already. Usually these cycles in the US dollar last for around a couple of months, let's say about 60, 59, 60 days. And as the current cycle is already 53 days long, as the US dollar is already resting on the 50-day moving average and coming close to poking below the Bollinger Bands perhaps over the next several days, as the RSI is relatively low, currently at about 42, and has come down to 41 back on Thursday, I think while dollar will continue a little bit lower just over the next perhaps few days, we might actually see the end of the ongoing dollar cycle over the next few days as it pokes below the Bollinger Bands, as the cycle length comes closer to its usual duration of a couple of months. I think after that we're going to see a new daily cycle in US dollar, a bit of a rally. I don't think we're going to see a higher high on US dollar before that new daily cycle turns back down. So what that tells us for gold is that, as I mentioned to the members at myfinanceteacher.org over here on the 15th of April, as dollar keeps dropping, I think gold has a chance to come to this resistance zone between around $1,800 and around $1,815. That resistance zone is based on that round number of 1,800, as well as the recent low in the middle of January and one of the recent highs at the second half of February. And as we've expected, gold has approached this resistance zone a little bit over the last couple of days, and gold has finally broken above the 50-day moving average and has finally given us a higher high, as I said, versus that high in mid-March. All of these are very positive signs over the intermediate term. What that tells me is that perhaps this low in early March or some sort of a double bottom over here between early March and late March was the end of that intermediate cycle, which was a frustration which started over here at the very end of November. So over the intermediate term, gold is looking very interesting right now. However, over the very short term, as dollar is getting a little bit close to oversold, it's not oversold yet, and as gold approaches this resistance zone a little bit higher than the current price, is about $20 to $30 higher than the current gold price, and as the ongoing short-term daily cycle in gold is now 42 days long, usually these cycles in gold also last for around a couple of months. Sometimes they stretched up to 3 months or so. I think over the next few days there would be time for gold to turn back down from that resistance zone and perhaps give us the end of the ongoing short-term daily cycle, sometime closer to its average duration of around a couple of months, perhaps sometime in the end of April or early May. That's over the short term. But in the intermediate term, I think after this temporary pull back down from that resistance, there is a good chance for gold to continue higher up to that round number of, let's say, perhaps $2,000, because, as I mentioned, there is a pretty good chance that this frustrating intermediate cycle, which caught me out a little bit with a very short-term rally, has probably finished with a bit of a double bottom a few weeks ago. Before we continue, let me remind you guys to subscribe to the channel if you haven't and click that bell notification. Thanks a lot. So that's what the gold chart tells me. Let's move on to GDX. It's also a very positive sign. GDX is finally, over the last few days, is breaking above this downtrend line that has been in place, that has been respected all the way since early August. So this is a really good sign. And just as gold is approaching a bit of a resistance zone, GDX might approach a bit of a resistance zone over here at its 200-day moving average, somewhere around $37. And what we also see is that GDX is already poking a little bit above the Bollinger Bands. Usually it takes several pokes above Bollinger Bands for an uptrend to reverse back down. But another positive sign on GDX is that while gold gave us some sort of a double bottom between early and late March, GDX is already showing us a positive trend with higher highs and higher lows. So for the intermediate term duration over the next several weeks, perhaps over the next 2 to 3 months, this is a very positive sign. Although in the very short term, as I said, perhaps after another few days of upward momentum, we'll see GDX cool down for the short term. Let's move on to the gold optimism index, which usually bottoms somewhere around this green line together with intermediate cycle lows, or at least relatively close on the timeline to these intermediate cycle lows. As in over here in August 2018, we've seen a very long decline, very painful decline in gold price. We see optimism index dropped actually even below this green line. Same thing in May 2019, optimism index came very close to this green line, indicating an intermediate cycle low. The timing was a little bit off, but a couple of weeks here or there around the intermediate cycle low doesn't really change that much in terms of your gains into the new intermediate cycle rally. Again, same thing over here in late 2019. A bit of a difference, perhaps less than 1 week difference on the timeline between when this optimism index bottomed and the end of the intermediate cycle. But unlike a lot of cycles over the last few years, the last 3 intermediate cycles on gold bottomed with the optimism index somewhere around 40 to 50. And as I mentioned, perhaps this black color versus the red color circles, perhaps we've seen the end of that intermediate cycle that started at the very end of November, with optimism index coming, well, not really close to the green line yet, but perhaps low enough as opposed to recent 3 intermediate cycle lows. We've seen this optimism index in around mid-40s, I think it was 44. And since then we see the optimism is improving, but we are far from being too excited on precious metals. A lot of people are still quite disappointed with the performance of precious metals over the last several months. So I think this disappointment on the markets actually gives it power, gives it energy to push higher. Remember, as I often mention in my videos, you want to invest when there is, so to speak, blood flowing on the streets. And next, let's have a look at this indicator we developed at myfinancesteacher.org, which is the 25-week return on gold price. That's the red line over here, and blue line is the gold price itself. The triangles over here indicate the intermediate cycle lows on gold, and perhaps we should have another triangle over here in the early part of March. While the arrows indicate the level of this 25-week return, close to the corresponding intermediate cycle low. What do we see? The arrows here are placed anywhere between positive 4% to down negative 11% or 12%. So since 2018, it's usually been a good idea to start accumulating some precious metals when this 25-week return is anywhere below 0% and perhaps closer to negative 10%. And what do we see most recently? This 25-week return did drop all the way down to negative 13%, and it's recovering now, which also indicates a very good likelihood that the intermediate cycle did finish over there in early March. And in reaction to this possibility, as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, I've increased allocation to precious metals over here somewhere in the early part of April, and we've already had a bit of a rally since then. Talking about our experiences with the members at myfinancesteacher.org, over the last few weeks, we've also had a really nice experience on QQQ. We have somewhere around 7 to 8% gains in about a couple of weeks so far. We've also had a really interesting experience in wheat and copper, somewhere around 7% gains on them as well in a very short term so far. We've had really amazing gains on Ethereum, and recently decreased our position substantially at Ethereum prices over 2,400, and Ethereum is now at 2,200. So things are going pretty well, and if you'd like to see more details on this nearly daily analysis that I post at myfinancesteacher.org, consider joining us. You'd be very welcome. For now, I hope you had a nice weekend. I wish you a productive Monday and good luck in your trades.